All right. Hello, everyone. Super nice to have all of you here. And I can see a couple of you are still logging in. So welcome to this GFA Monitor Masterclass. It's our third one, and this one will be on resource stewardship. We have a couple of esteemed panelists among us today. But firstly, I'm just going to go around with some practical details. Please use the chat to write if you have any questions. There's also a Q&A where you can write. And please keep the comments flowing. It's amazing to see that you're from all over the world. Please let us know where you're from. The masterclass will also be recorded and made public afterwards. So really shortly, my name is Christina. I work as Head of Innovation and Academy here at Global Fashion Agenda. So I'm in charge of all the projects that are education and innovation related. So that's everything from our innovation forum with solution providers, our designer challenge with creatives, our masterclass like this, and our work with the next gen, so the future students. So really excited about sharing that as well, and we'll share something about it in the end. But diving directly into why you're here today, I have my colleague Felicity, who's the sustainability manager here at Global Fashion Agenda and who's the author behind the GFA Monitor. So Felicity, over to you.
Thank you, Christina, for that kind introduction, and welcome everyone to today's session. Thanks for already introducing me, Christina. As she mentioned, I'm the sustainability manager at Global Fashion Agenda, and I largely work on our core publications at GFA, on the research and the writing, as well as engaging stakeholders around those core publications. And yeah, I'll just be kicking off today with a short introduction to our latest report, the GFA Monitor, and a quick deep dive on the resource stewardship priority. So yeah, last year in June, we published the first edition of the GFA Monitor. And this was really intended as a resource to guide fashion leaders towards a vision of a net positive fashion industry. And how we define that industry is a fashion industry which puts back more into society, the environment, and the global economy than it takes out. The GFA Monitor really builds on the fashion CEO agenda framework, really an A to Z on how to take action today across a number of holistic sustainability priority areas. And going forward, we really hope that the GFA Monitor will act as a gauge for industry progress. The GFA Monitor is available on the GFA website to freely download. So if you've yet to do so, please do head to our website and check it out. Next slide, please. Great. So to consolidate industry guidance in the GFA Monitor, we brought together over 20 leading industry organizations to really support the co-creation of this publication, to understand current industry progress, where action is currently at, where action still needs to take place, and what existing industry tools, resources, and programs already exist to support the industry in driving forward their sustainability strategies. So on the screen, you can see who we engaged. In the center, we have 5 impact partners, each head up their respective priority area. And below, a broader group of principal stakeholders who supported the co-creation in their respective knowledge fields. Above, we have Higg, our data partner, who provided us with aggregated performance data across all 5 priority areas, as well as our strategic and our associate partners supported as a sounding board for the publication. And just to note, going forward, this is an annual publication and we very much welcome further industry collaboration. So if you are an industry organization who is interested to be part of this work going forward, then please do reach us directly. Next slide, thanks. Perfect. So this, for those of you who aren't familiar with the GFA publications, these are the 5 priorities of our Fashion CEO agenda and the priorities that we also build upon in the GFA Monitor. So you can see on the screen, these include a respectful and secure work environments, better wage systems, resource stewardship, smart material choices, and circular systems. If we pop onto the next slide, this is just a screen grab from our executive summary of the GFA Monitor to see how we've really designed the report as tangibly as possible. So each chapter begins by defining and providing context to each area, outlining industry opportunities, and then the necessary actions needed in order to achieve that vision of a net positive fashion industry. Next slide, please. Great, so today's session is going to be focused on the priority of resource stewardship, and how we define resource stewardship is a whole systems approach that ensures the responsible management and use of shared resources, such as water, land, and energy, both on-site and in surrounding contexts, collectively with both upstream and downstream supply chain actors, developing solutions that address shared challenges. And obviously, of course, our ultimate goal is to, well, reduce or better, so remove the reliance on virgin resources so that future generations can benefit from them. And I suppose just to set the scene, we all know that human demand is rapidly outgrowing natural supply of resources. And we really established in the GFA Monitor these 4 priority actions that we believe the fashion industry should take forward in order to achieve that vision of a net positive fashion industry. And in resource stewardship, as you can see on the screen, we believe that these 4 actions should focus firstly on energy efficiency and the use of renewable sources, driving towards less extractive sourcing models and the adoption of regenerative solutions to lower our impact on nature, pursuing a context-driven approach to water stewardship, and the elimination of hazardous chemicals, and really ramping up sustainable chemical management. Next slide, please. Thanks. Great. So just a few more slides from me. Within the GFA Monitor, we also guide towards existing credible tools and best practices, also case studies, so you can see organizations and brands who are already accelerating action within these areas. And next slide. And yeah, we also tap into what the legislative environment is currently doing, what brands should be prepared for in the near future, and highlighting what data we already have as an industry from credible primary data collectors. Next slide. Great, so that was just a short introduction from myself, and I'll be handing it back over to Faith. As I mentioned at the start, the GFA Monitor is freely downloadable on the GFA website, so please do head over and download it. But otherwise, wish everyone a great session.
Thank you so much, Felicity. Always a pleasure having you explaining the different priorities in the monitor. So I won't waste any time. I can see a lot of more people have signed on. So just want to say again, welcome everyone. If you have any questions during the panel, please write them in the chat or in the Q&A and we'll get back to you. So enough from me. I'll invite my colleague over here, who is Faith Robinson.
Hey everyone, thanks Felicity. I'm so excited for this. I'm Faith, Head of Content at Global Fashion Agenda, and it's my job this afternoon to lead the panel discussion, and I can't wait to do that. So within the panel, we've got Bryant, Veronique, Stewart, and Ben, who are all online with us. Thank you so much for being here. But before we go into the discussion, I would love to invite Bryant to share a little bit of information about your organization's contribution to the GFA Monitor under resource stewardship.
Yeah, thanks, Faith. I'm excited to be here. So I do want to apologize very quickly in advance. I'm getting over an illness and I lost my voice. So if I pause or if it is difficult to hear me again, I apologize. But as Faith mentioned, Bryant LaPres, Director of Industry Engagement here at the Apparel Impact Institute. And we'll spend about 5 minutes just giving a brief introduction to who the Apparel Impact Institute is, and then talk more specifically about resource efficiency throughout the panel discussion today. So if we go ahead and jump to the next slide, please. The Apparel Impact Institute is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization based out of the United States with sort of these three key buckets to the work that we focus on. So first and foremost, we talk about identifying. So this is where we really look at how do we best help the industry, so the apparel and footwear sector, focus on identifying and validating solutions that can help drive progress towards the different roadmaps, whether it's decarbonization or looking at ways that we can support resource stewardship for the industry. So knowing there's a universe of programs, solutions, and that could include anything like the Apparel Impact Institute's Clean by Design program. It could be a technology such as something related to coal phase out or boiler efficiency, really understanding those solutions. When we talk about funding, this is really about how are we able to support the industry by bringing together philanthropic organizations, brand funding, along with manufacturing funding to really drive these. And I'll dive deeper into a great opportunity and that we've launched within the last year called our Fashion Climate Fund. And then last but not least, we know that we have to be able to bring all this funding together to be able to drive scale for the industry. So when we talk about scale, knowing a lot of the organizations, whether it's a brand, retailer, or manufacturer, with 2030, 2050 targets, we have to be able to drive scale for the industry in a quick way, knowing that these time horizons are coming relatively quickly. So if we go to the next slide here, setting the stage on the idea when I mentioned funding. And so this is the idea of the Fashion Climate Fund that we launched last year. So historically at the Apparel Impact Institute on the left side, what you see is this idea of a programmatic foundation. So historically speaking, and to date, the Apparel Impact Institute has in-house sort of these key programs where we really were driven by a brand-sponsored model. A brand would come to the Institute, request to nominate suppliers in Clean by Design, whether it was energy or water efficiency or chemistry, followed by our carbon leadership program. What this has then led to is an evolution driven by a lot of the conversations with our brand and manufacturing partnership to the idea of the Fashion Climate Fund. So this is really a collective action model that we're going to be able to deploy funding across the industry to support resource stewardship with a key focus on decarbonization. And so if we jump ahead to the next slide here, this will start to give visibility to what is the Fashion Climate Fund and how does it work. And so I mentioned earlier in the conversation, the ideas of identifying funding and scaling that you'll see on the bottom of the slides here. But on the left, this idea of program intake is really about those solutions that exist in the industry. How are we able to create a mechanism to take in applications and sort of vetting processes for all those solutions that exist, then leverage the Fashion Climate Fund that you see in the middle of the screen to deploy funding in each of these different categories, whether it's pre-seed, for example, maybe it's an idea, pilot, where there's maybe some existing data or information around a solution or a program that needs additional funding. Maybe it's a program that's in a model scale that really is looking for some additional funding to take it a step further. And last but not least, what solutions might be ready for scale that need funding to commercialize their impact, all resulting in what we're calling the Climate Solutions Portfolio, which is going to be an online web-based platform where all of this information, whether it's the solution, the reductions, the technology exist, and will be made available and visible for the industry. So this is a little bit of the structure on the Fashion Climate Fund. And on the next slide, briefly introducing now, what is this idea of the funding model for the Fashion Climate Fund to look like? And so on the left side here, you'll see on the screen this idea of a $250 million fund managed by the Apparel Impact Institute, contributions of $150 million from brand retailers on the top, and then philanthropy on the bottom. So that's a unique way that we'll manage by deploying those dollars into the center here, where you see the idea of program budgets, grants. Again, these are solutions focused on decarbonization. But what we know within this model is that it requires an idea of blended capital. So the fund is $250 million on the left, but on the right side, we know that suppliers are making investments. So when you think about a supplier program budget, for example, looking at $150 million in investments by suppliers, but that requires additional opportunities to unlock and access capital for improvements, whether it's through debt and equity structures. So part of this universe that the Apparel Impact Institute will support for resource stewardship as well is building a universe and sort of a collective of banking partnerships, banking relationships, investment opportunities to help manufacturers, brands, and those within the industry unlock this capital to drive improvements to 2030 on a decarbonization pathway. And so that's just a little introduction here that I wanted to share about how we're really taking forward not only this idea of the fund at $250 million, but acknowledgement that these solutions require investments and how we hope to take that forward. And then as we wind up the introduction to the Institute here on the next slide, what I thought I would just share quickly is a nod to those who are currently lead funders within the Fashion Climate Fund. You can see here PVH, Target, H&M, both the foundation and group, the Schmidt Family Foundation, Lululemon, and what we're excited for is our strategic collaborators who are helping provide guidance and oversight within the Fashion Climate Fund. And then the last slide here, I believe, for me is just also an additional acknowledgement that what we talked about thus far is the Fashion Climate Fund. We have a number of other programmatic opportunities, and those that you see here on the screen fall within sort of the leadership of my team. And so it's overseeing all of our brand partnerships, those key stakeholders. And then on the right side here, our founders and funders who help make all of our work possible to help support the industry towards decarbonization. So really quick introduction about the Apparel Impact Institute, and happy to hand it over to Faith and Christina to get us back into the panel discussion today.
Love it. Thanks, Bryant. Thanks so much. It was pretty interesting to see the breakdown of the fund and how it operates and where we're at. And quite a practical kind of tangible backdrop to the panel that we're going to have now. So I'm so thrilled to welcome you all. Thanks so much for joining, and thanks everyone, of course, for logging on. We are diving into the chapter 3 of the GFA Monitor today, and we've had masterclasses each month for the first half of the year to represent each chapter of the document. As you know, today is about resource stewardship, and I want to really get back to what that means, both in terms of how we talk about this topic and how we act on it too. So let's see, we're going to take questions at the end. So anyone in the audience, please feel free to use the Q&A function, the chat box. I'll pick up questions towards the end. And you know, the mission here when we are working on something like this topic or any targets within fashion and sustainability or responsibility, the vision here is a net positive fashion industry, right? It's a space where natural resources, the economy, people can all give back to one another and find a harmonized way to get by. So I would love to invite all the audience to maybe just take a second and even close your eyes if you had a long day already and have a think about your most recent memory or experience in nature, and try and connect that to any of the different resources we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about energy, water, biodiversity. What does this mean to you, for one, and what does it mean to your business, for another, or your organization? So let's get started. I want to come first to you, Stewart, and to set the scene even further when it comes to technology. I would love for you to share a bit more with the audience about how data, and notably tracking decarbonization, let's start there for this topic, is so essential. Would you kick us off?
Well, thank you. That is a question where we could probably spend a whole hour working on. So I'll try and make chunks out of this. And first I'll go back to resource stewardship, and that idea of that resource stewardship for me is more a question. It's how do we best allocate our resources? How do we allocate to get them the best outcome? What is the most appropriate way? And what's interesting with sustainability in the fashion industry is that appropriate allocation is going to vary in each situation, in each brand, in each geographical location. If you're in a water-rich environment or a water-scarce environment, the allocation of those water resources is going to look completely different. But if we're looking at decarbonization here, so decarbonization being the process of reducing the amount of carbon or CO2 equivalent with greenhouse gases that we send into the atmosphere, we need that data because we need to be able to measure how much CO2 is going into the atmosphere. And then we also need to measure how much CO2 we're taking out of the atmosphere. So there's this idea of we have negative impacts and we need to reduce those negative impacts, but we also have positive impacts. We have regenerative agriculture, we have carbon capture and sequestration, and all these technologies that actually enable us to have positive impacts, which is really what we're going to need to get to that net zero. So that data there is what we need to both measure the negative and the positive impacts and track those. That I believe that's where it's really important. But I would like to just say a word of caution, because too often we're seeing the data tracking, the measuring and the reporting being used as a proxy for taking action. And those things are completely different. One enables the other, but they are not equivalent.
Okay, thanks for kicking us off, Stewart. What a poignant comment to kick us off with. I really like your question around what is meant by resource stewardship, which I expect will kind of come out as maybe a theme in this conversation. But I love your focus on action, which is absolutely the point. So next over to you, Bryant. Your work seems really focused on energy efficiency. So would you say that this is a good entry point for brands and businesses in fashion to start their resource stewardship journey, would you say?
Yeah, I like this question. I think what I want to do, though, in sort of this question is really build on what Stewart set up. I think there's a really good thought that kind of starts the stage in the conversation. So, as I think about it sort of in my work, it's really about insights, actions, and impact. And so to Stewart's point, the insights is, what is the data telling us? Actions could be things like energy efficiency. It could be setting a carbon or water reduction goal. But the key here is those impacts and what are we actually able to achieve? And so when I think about those organizations, whether it's a brand or a manufacturer who are part of the fashion industry, I think it's very much an entry point for resource stewardship, whether it's that focus on energy efficiency being that foundational thing. And when we talk about renewables, it's really interesting because there's a lot of conversation about, I'm ready for renewables. And the question then should go back to, well, have you addressed energy efficiency? Because if you haven't become efficient, you're going to have to procure or create more renewable energy. So you're sort of getting a little ahead of the game. And so really for us, we talk about decarbonization pathways or levers. And so Faith, as you mentioned, like the entry point should be this idea of energy efficiency. How can you look at the energy that you're consuming, whether it's in a retail footprint, a retail store, whether it's within your supply chain, deep in your manufacturing facilities, which is where a lot of the Apparel Impact Institute work lives. It's at that facility level, which is where a lot of our brand partners are pushing sort of those, what I would say, scope 3 emissions and interventions. Once you get past the idea of energy efficiency and, things like renewables or coal phase out, maybe more of these capital intensive, more challenging sort of solutions or opportunities as part of that decarbonization pathway, very much become part of the conversation. And so it's a unique opportunity where brands are able to help support or push their suppliers to consider these types of interventions or solutions. So we very much see that hyper focus on start with efficiency. Once we've addressed efficiency, how are we able to take it a step further now, knowing that efficiency and efficiency alone won't achieve the reduction targets necessary for the industry on a decarbonization journey. Then it shifts to renewables. Once you've done renewables, the more complicated things of coal phase out, which I think Stewart also teed up really well. A lot of these different interventions or solutions are highly dependent on region of the world, production processes and things like that, that data very much must support. So that's sort of the evolution of the work that we see and kind of that very hyper-focused journey that we're able to help support brands and manufacturers on.
Yeah, I love that, because your question's sort of helping me paint a picture of the route of travel for this particular topic within sustainability strategy or imperatives. I love the idea that you might start with efficiencies and then like get a little bit more complex as you go. That makes a lot of sense to me. I also just wanted to ask all the audience, maybe you could just type in yes or no in the chat box to this question. Are you new to the term resource stewardship? It could be really interesting just to see. Yeah, okay. Nice. It seems like this is quite fresh. We'll get to that. But thanks so much. It's really good to hear from you guys. So my next question is going to move over to you, Veronique. And I'm really asking this question, you're coming from a brand point of view. So it would be great to make some of this topic more tangible for us in the audience and tell us a bit more about a brief example of a resource stewardship work stream or program. How does a brand like PUMA, make a plan to tackle something this complex, this holistic, this essential?
Yes. Thank you. I think I can give an example about how we work on climate, because it has actually impact on the kind of material that we use in our product, but also cleaner production programs for our factories. So first, what is important is to really have clear goals and credible goals, like science-based targets. So we have our science-based target approved in 2019, but along with this, we also have the goals on climate, air, and water, for example, for 2025. So we have actually more than these goals. I guess what we did also is in 2021 is to really understand our impact. So we have looked at more deeper in our scope 3 emission around purchasing goods and services. So more or less, what is the material that we're using? What is the greenhouse gas emission from it, and our supply chain emission? And this has helped us to understand when we engage in cleaner production program, like the one Clean by Design from the Apparel Impact Institute, we can definitely see the difference between the factories that have joined energy efficiency, working on renewable energy compared to others. What this also told us is also where we actually use more sustainable material like cotton and polyester, which is our bigger volume of our material volume. It has really shown us as well that it has lower footprint than other materials where maybe we haven't moved forward. And when I say more sustainable material, is around, of course, using more recycled material or better cotton as an example. So having clear goals, measuring your impact, I will definitely echo Stewart. You can't measure your impact if you don't have data, but how to create internal awareness is also important, because it helps us to really say that the goals that we have is the right direction, and we can see for the programs that we have implemented, this also helping us. And collaboration is key. So collaboration with the rest of the industry initiatives. So we also partner using the facility environmental module from what Stewart explained, to in order to avoid duplication for the factory. So we will have one single way to measure their impact, and we can benchmark them towards the rest of the industry. Collaboration is also key, for example, especially on policy advocacy. So for example, PUMA is part of the fashion industry charter for climate action. So where it's a group of like-minded brand and suppliers that have the same commitment, the same goal, where we can definitely work together on the decarbonization of the supply chain. Also use more sustainable material that will be defined by textile exchange, for example. And there is a working group on policy advocacy where we feel in some sourcing countries, maybe we can engage with the government to have renewable energy more accessible. So I guess this is how we are working on climate around resource stewardship.
Yeah, it's clear that it's a lot of different channels of knowledge and of collaboration, and also of kind of like internal brand team output. It could be product, or it could be a policy. So to me, that's really what's coming out of this conversation so far, and especially with Bryant's presentation at the start there, just seeing how many different bodies are working on this topic, and in what direction are we going? And I think that's a big part of the GFA Monitor as well, which is just to try and harmonize all that. So thanks all for contributing to that document. So Ben, I want to come over to you. As we've seen in the chat, this topic is quite new to some people. And on the prep call, we acknowledged that too a couple of days ago. So I also know that textiles is quite a new sector for your work. So tell us more about your approach. And I would love for you to talk more about why being contextual matters. Linking a bit to what Stewart said at the beginning, you might be in a region with a lot of water or not so much. So yeah, tell us more about your approach to resource stewardship.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And it's so great to hear so many of our opinions echoed by the other panelists. So I'm going to speak about water, but so much of this is true about other resources. So water is entirely contextual. So I'm from the Alliance for Water Stewardship. We have a standard called the AWS standard. It's non-sector specific. It guides water users of all types to truly understand their local context in regards to water, to understand who else is dependent upon the same water sources and who they may be affecting or may be affected by when it comes to water. So our standard takes you on a journey to really understand water from its most holistic sense, taking into account context. But why is that actually important? So when it comes to water, everything happens within a catchment or a watershed. It's just the physical boundary in a landscape where all of the water flows. And, landscapes are unique. When you think about biodiversity, habitats are all unique. The conditions to make them thrive are super dependent upon context. But it's not just the landscapes, it's also the culture, the social, perspectives, the governance, existing infrastructure, but also within an organization, the culture and the governance within an industry and the context and, culture outside of a boundary. So for us, we see water, we like to think of the global water crisis, but really we should be seeing it as billions of micro water crises all happening simultaneously, overlapping, and it's quite a complex web of different factors that make everything unique. So when it comes to setting targets or developing action plans, you really need to take into account your context. We've heard about energy use efficiency or water use efficiency, and you can strive for that, and it's very important that we do that, but you're not lowering your risk of flooding. Or I was speaking to one of our certified sites last week, and their biggest risk when it comes to water is forest fires. And I was thinking, is that because you shut off the water to fight the fire? But no, it's actually the impact afterwards. So all of the, fire creates ash, all of the ash washes off the landscape into the local rivers where the municipalities are collecting their water from. And that river turns to sludge and they can no longer extract water. So for this site, they produce cereal bars in Albuquerque. And for the company, it costs millions of dollars if they don't have their water flowing into the site because they have to stop production. And it's like, yeah, no matter how efficient they were still going to be exposed to that risk. So they've recognized that actually to lower risk, improve the resilience of their business, they have to work in the upper catchment to regenerate and conserve the ecosystems there and prevent forest fires. So it's like, you have to do the on-site measures, the good water management, the good energy stewardship and all of that. But you have to look outwards and see what the bigger challenges are. What else are you having to deal with that may come unexpected? Yeah, hopefully that answers the question well enough.
Yeah, I think you really shared your approach. And to me listening, it really just highlighted how holistically this massive topic needs to be considered and perhaps broken down. And I feel like we tend to try and simplify things to understand them or to affect them. So how do we, I'm thinking, how do we do that at the same time as being context specific? It's certainly a really big challenge. But thanks so much for connecting the dots and drawing a bit of an ecosystem picture in your answer there, which I really appreciated. So I want to look ahead, I guess, for this next set of questions. We've got about 10 minutes left of the Q&A until the panel, until we jump into some Q&A. So Veronique, back to you. Let's talk about chemicals, because chemicals from products and processes affect so many different parts of the natural world in so many visible and invisible ways. So can fashion ever use less hazardous materials? And if we look ahead, for example, in 2030, what do you think fashion's relationship with chemicals could or should look like?
Yes, I'm pretty optimistic person. So I think, again, collaboration is key here. Engagement with chemical suppliers is also important. So as part of ZDHC, we definitely look at whatever the factory is buying as a chemical. Does that meet with the ZDHC MRSL? What's the process in the factory? So we use the FEM, especially zooming in the chemical module on chemical management, and provide more training. We partner with GIZ, for example, in some chemical management improvement program with them in China and Vietnam. So it's about adopting the same standards, measurement tools. Providing support about how the factory can set up a chemical inventory list and how they can get their in-check report, so we can really have a conformance rate when it comes to that. I see great progress with that industry initiative and this collaboration so far. I feel really optimistic. The next step is to really engage more with chemical suppliers, how they can also be part of the journey as we are moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like that's a stakeholder group that often we don't hear from very much. So I like that point. And just one quick question. You said the term conformance rate. What did you mean by that?
We actually, after the factory has done a chemical inventory list to really look at all the chemical and the content, so they can upload this list into the DHC gateway, and then they can back what they call in-check report, which actually tell us by weight and by quantity of chemical if they are meeting MRSL standards or not. So we can take it from there. We set goals on conformance rates for the supplier. We measure, and we provide also together with CDHC and other experts organization capacity building to the factories. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Thanks so much. So Ben, I just want to come back to you, because when we spoke last week, you mentioned that Alliance for Water Stewardship was launching a couple of new tools, and I just wondered if you would like to share a little bit of the resources that are freely available.
Sure. I mean, since our conversation, I've started seeing things in a slightly different way. So the AWS standards, so we had UN Water last week, and we had, AWS had a presence there. We had panelists who have used the standard. And I was listening to one of them, and they made a really excellent point that our standard, which is freely available for everyone to download for our website, it's in many ways an educational tool. So yes, it's a standard, it's considered best practice for water, but really you can give it to a supplier, you can give it to a site, and it will teach them how to think about water in this very broad sense. It gives them the step-by-step process for understanding their context, how to develop an action plan, implement it, evaluate it, and communicate about it. So, we have that, which is a tremendous offering for all water users, but we also recognize that it's very specific to a certain location, it's site-based. So we have started to develop resources to support other water users or people that support water users that may not use the AWS standard. So today we're launching our latest resource, which looks at water stewardship in its broader sense and what that means for the textile industry. I'll put a link to it in the chat box after I finish speaking. But we've also, that sits alongside non-sector specific resources such as online learning modules, different publications and guidance documents. So the standard itself is highly worth looking into and reading, because it will give you everything you need. But then we have all this other stuff to kind of break it down and make it more understandable for, you know, non-experts and everyone that has such a broad range of things they need to specialize in.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Thanks so much. It's kind of amazing in this short masterclass. We've touched on energy efficiency, water, coal phase out, biodiversity, a little bit of soil health, the regenerative agriculture, forest fires. I mean, there's so much different project streams in this, chemicals, of course, Veronique, like so much. So I just want to pass over to Stewart really and just see do you have any way that you could give us a kind of industry status on this topic? I don't know how complicated it must be to answer such a question, but are we improving as an industry, I guess?
It's not really a complex one in the sense that so Higg has a large amount of brands and suppliers that happen to be our users and customers. I cannot and will not share individual names and processes just to respect everybody's privacy and statuses, because it's really important that the data in our tools remains the property of those organizations. So we only look at aggregated things. And from a macro point of view, yes, everyone is basically tracking their resource use. And it's not just with Higg tools, but there are other tools out there. There's the Textile Exchange Preferred Fiber report. Everybody is looking at their resource use, be it for simple costing and management, but also reporting of impact, whether that's greenhouse gas emissions or water or chemistry or anything else. At a micro level, those same organizations are doing that work using Higg tools this time and looking at not just their negative impacts, but also trying to track their positive impacts. And here we can talk about biogenic carbon, so the carbon sequestered in a specific material, and that can be found on our tools. So most of our users are actually on that journey. Whether people are actually on track to improve, so define, are we improving? And what I would like to look at is the latest IPCC report that was released just last week that says to meet net zero, we have to reduce our CO2 emissions, CO2 equivalent emissions by 43% by 2030. 43% by 2030. We're in 2023. I did a quick calculations. That's roughly 7.7 emissions year on year, every year until 2030. That's possible. That's possible using resource efficiency. That's possible using renewable energy. That's possible using making less or different business models where you rent instead of sell. All the options are out there, and this is what's fascinating about the industry. But if you add any inkling of growth of our volume of production into that 7.7% morphs into 9, 10, 11% year on year. And that becomes more and more difficult for anybody to achieve. So are we on track? I don't know. Can we be? Yes, we can. Certainly, we have the tools. We know what to do. We know how to do it. We know how much it costs.
Stewart, thanks so much. That breakdown, just like painting the picture there, it's just what I was hoping to extract from you with that question. So thanks so much. And, thanks for mentioning growth. It's a topic that is really, really complicated. And, it is highlighted even through Felicity's point in her presentation around decoupling value creation from virgin resources. I mean, it has to start there. And that's a key message in the monitor and this topic. So let's just hand it over to you, Bryant, just for the last quick word. And I guess just to hear what your vision or what your belief around the future of carbon leadership, which is a core pillar of your work, what does that look like? Very briefly.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that can sometimes be complicated. So I'll answer it in two really quick ways. So first, the idea of carbon in general, but secondarily in context to the program that we have around carbon leadership. So first, the idea of this question, I think, has to also root itself in a mutual understanding amongst everybody that this is a journey, right? Different brands, different people, everyone's at a different part of this journey. So if we accept that it's a journey, I think everybody with the understanding then of, how do we think big about what do we really have to address? How do we start small and act now? So like that's really the future of this idea of a carbon leadership journey. It's getting from just the general insights. What do we know? Do we have a reduction goal? How do we get to action? So to Stewart's point, we have all the right information. We know we can do it, but it's about unlocking the opportunities now, whether it is efficiency, whether it's we've done efficiency, I have coal phase out, like this really complicated topic. I don't have the investment dollars to replace a boiler. Oh, by the way, I operate now in a country where an alternative maybe such as natural gas or biofuels, the tensions of all of these things exist, right? So the mutual understanding amongst everyone that it's a journey, we have to act now, but coming together in a collective is really how we take this forward. That then is,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Brian, I thought you'd finished, but I'll keep it moving. Thank you so much. I love that you mentioned that word tension, because I think that is at the heart of a lot of this work, but being on a journey, it certainly feels like a nice way to frame this work, especially when it's so complex, but so beautifully holistic at the same time. So I am going to pick out a couple of questions. I'll just go from the top. I'm looking at the Q&A box here, and I'm just going to pick out a couple that have been asked by the audience. So the first question really looks at how different stakeholders can help each other on this journey. So I wonder, maybe over to you, Bryant. I might start with you, especially because your work around funding and finance could be relevant to this question. Are you seeing brands or businesses in fashion willing to support their suppliers adopt some of these technologies or principles that can help with efficiency?
Yeah, the simple answer is yes. Where it starts to get maybe a little bit more complicated is what that level of support could look like. So we've seen a few different sort of pathways that a brand will bring to a supplier or a manufacturer. It's maybe direct support or sponsorship through a program where there's a heavy focus on like an energy audit, or kind of directing them through to identify those right solutions. That's kind of that first area where a brand is supporting a manufacturer. Alternatively, this idea then of those investments. So if things have been identified, boiler efficiencies, replacement of steam traps, maybe it's renewable systems, whatever the intervention might be, there's a shift in sort of the mindset right now where we're seeing a lot of brands trying to explore how those opportunities for investments could look. Is it the brand issuing a note? Is it helping them provide maybe some guaranteed orders over a 3-year by which that facility can go get investment backing from a bank because there's some guarantees and the banks are happier with less risk? So there's a lot of these evolutions and mechanisms trying to unlock access to capital and finance with the brand partnership. So that's kind of that brand side of the equation of how they're trying to help suppliers address these issues. Okay,
thanks. What I loved in your answer was the phrase shift in mindset. I mean, that's what so much of our industry and every industry needs. So the next question, I'd like to offer this to Stewart, is about change management. How do you work on change management within an organization? I think this could be good for you because you work with so many organizations. So the question is really trying to understand how you get buy-in from different teams who might not be so focused on this topic to maybe try and do that mindset shift.
Well, this is probably going to be personal, but I really think it's about putting things into perspective, showing the big picture. Sustainability, as it can be seen as the birds and the bees and saving water and reducing energy consumption. But it's also about, if you're talking about other parts of the organization, it's also about marketing and your position in the market. It's also about finance. And within finance, it can be costing, but it can be pricing. And it's also about production. Is there a better resource or a better way to do our dyeing? Is there a new technology? And if you can spark that interest within those teams because they can put sustainability into their work, then that's how you want to do it. As I say, we don't need, well, hopefully at some point we won't need sustainability managers anymore, because that will be embedded in each function. So if we do our job well, our jobs will disappear because sustainability will be embedded in finance, in marketing, in production, in purchasing, in HR.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you, Stewart. It's crazy to imagine the future of our organizations working on these topics and how quickly that's already changing. The next question looks to, I'm going to go to you, Veronique, with this question. You talked a lot about collaboration across different companies and organizations. So I just wonder, from your point of view, how do you work with those that maybe aren't moving as fast? So what are the barriers to collaboration amongst brands, would you say?
Yeah, I still wonder, especially when you have all of us to face the same challenge. I assume is also, we are sharing factories, but sometimes we're not sharing factories with the brand that would have the same commitment. We also maybe would not have the same priority on the factory that we share from a business perspective or long-term perspective. So that could be the bottleneck as well. But there are some big collaboration or big industry initiative where there's a lot of brands, but the collaboration sometimes is one brand with another brand. So we have a lot of contact with our peers, especially when we know that we're sharing the factory, and then try to collaborate on capacity building activities, or actually try to align with the sense of direction, especially if the factory has to make some investment. So we try to, we haven't achieved this yet, but there's a lot of discussion about how we can definitely do a little bit our homework. So we bring one voice to the factory, so it's much clearer.
Thanks for the answer. Okay, well, there's actually quite a lot more questions, but we've reached time on this part of the masterclass. So I'm really sorry to those who have submitted questions that we haven't answered. Hopefully we'll be able to get to them in the next masterclass in some way. But for me, just to round off, thanks, Ben, for dropping that link into the chat to share the resources. This has been fascinating to me. Sometimes I get a little bit overwhelmed with this topic, especially when it blends so much into my personal love for being in natural spaces and engaging with these resources. So I like this topic. It's very visual to me for that reason. And I really want to thank you all for making it very tangible strategically today, which was really the objective. So to round off, anyone who's missing any other info, hopefully it can be found in the GFA Monitor report, which can be freely downloaded. And I'd just like to say thank you, all four of you. This has been really interesting. So I'm going to hand back to Christina. She's going to close the session today. Thanks.
Thank you, Faith.
Thank you so much. I think just sitting next to you guys and listening to the conversation is such an honor, and there were so many good points that all of you mentioned, and I think that we could continue this for much longer, actually. So looking at time, I'm just gonna have a few slides to show you all. We have 2 upcoming masterclasses, the last 2 in this series, which is on smart material choices and circular systems. You can already sign up to them on our web page, and we will also send out a newsletter with you where you can also sign up to them. And then I want to share really briefly about another academy project that we are doing. So this masterclass series is a part of GFA Academy. And another project is the Next Gen Assembly, where we are working together with London College of Fashion and Fashion Values program that is in collaboration with Karen Group, Folk Business and IBM. And here we are searching for 7 people that can either be students or early professional or PDH students. These people will be invited to the summit. They will be really integrated into a lot of things that are happening there. And I can't reveal too much, but it's going to be really exciting. And I just want, because I've seen all of you guys who've joined this masterclass, and I'd love if you guys will share it with your network and students, etc. So just wanted to share that, and we'll share it in the chat as well. And lastly but not least, we have all of our great work, and it always consolidates at the summit, which is on the 27th and 28th of June. So please don't hesitate buying your ticket to come. We're super excited to see you there, and it's going to be in Copenhagen. And then, as I said, we're going to send out just a thank you newsletter, and there'll be a survey. We'd like to hear from you in case there's anything we can do better for these masterclasses. So that is all from me and from Faith and from our lovely panelists. So I'm just going to round up now and say thank you so much for listening in, and thank you so much, panelists, for joining this session. All right. So take care, and see you. Bye.
Bye.